Klei Entertainment has only been around since 2005, and yet in that time they have gone from a small indie studio to releasing 5 of the best games that I've ever played. What's fascinating about this is not only that they've released so many hits in such a short time, but that these games all fall into completely different genres. So first there's Mark of the Ninja, a stealth action platformer which by the way had 96% positive reviews on Steam. There's Don't Starve, a survival game with 96% positive reviews on Steam. Then there's Invisible Ink, a turn-based strategy game which has 92% positive reviews on Steam. There's Oxygen Not Included, one of my favorites, a base building colony sim with again 96 positive reviews on Steam. And finally there's Griftlands, a card battler which also has 96 positive reviews on Steam. It's not unheard of for an indie developer to experiment with different games, but it's unusual for so many of these games to perform so well in reviews and sales. I've spent countless hours playing these games and I did a lot of research on the company. In this video, I'll explain why I believe this developer has been so successful. Before we get into the video, if you do like this content and you'd like to see more, please do like and subscribe. So going back to the various games that Klei has released in a short time, as I was saying, it's very rare for an indie developer to release game after game in completely different genres and yet still have every release be a hit both in terms of reviews and sales. It's true that a lot of these games share a similar art style, but I don't believe that's the reason why every Klei game is so well received. To understand the secret behind this company's success, we need to analyze each of these games to understand the common thread that ties all of their successes together. Note that this video will be completely spoiler-free. I'll stick to early gameplay to avoid spoiling anything related to story or gameplay elements in case you haven't played these games already. These aren't really very spoilable games anyway, but I still want to give potential new players the opportunity to go in blind and enjoy discovering these games. So we'll start by talking about Mark of the Ninja. This is one of the best stealth games that I've played. This is what you would get if you combined Gunpoint with Assassin's Creed if you were to take only the best elements from each. Everything in the game feels fluid, tactile and responsive. More than that, it is a game that encourages you to experiment with different playstyles. I've played through the entire game, including the DLC, and I'm still having fun playing through it again to experiment and take different approaches to levels. The art style is fantastic and the story is sufficient to provide a nice framework for the game. There is a lot that this game gets right, but one thing that sets it apart from any other stealth game, or at least from many of the other stealth games, is the pacing. You never spend too much time standing around waiting for a guard to walk to a certain position. Irrespective of whether you want to kill everything in your path or try to slip by everyone undetected, it is possible to progress quite quickly, especially once you start getting the hang of the game. Also, if you get spotted you can still fight back, and if you get killed you never lose too much progress. 2D platform games don't get much better than this, and if you're a fan of stealth games you absolutely have to have this. The one thing I want to say before starting to talk about the next game is that a lot of what is good about this game, the pacing, the multiple approaches, the replay value, etc., relies on really well built systems in the game that you can discover and master over time. We'll get back to this point as we're talking about the other games. So next up is Don't Starve. Don't Starve was a turning point for Klei Entertainment. They were already a successful indie developer at this point, but Don't Starve took their success to the next level. It was released before the survival game craze started and in some ways likely inspired a lot of survival games that followed. It features managing your health, hunger and sanity. You spend most of your time exploring, gathering resources, crafting, building a base and fighting or avoiding enemies. A lot of the gameplay may seem formulaic by today's standards given how many other survival games have been inspired by Don't Starve, but at the time it was pretty innovative. Like most of Klei's games, Don't Starve was heavily based around systems that you can learn and master over time. On top of that, this was also Klei's first hit that featured procedural generation, something that would return in most of their future titles and become a part of Klei's DNA in terms of how they would approach game design. It was also the first game with permadeath, and this is another feature that would return in future games. And this brings us on to Invisible Ink. So Invisible Ink is a turn-based spy stealth strategy game set in the near future, and even today this is one of the most interesting and innovative stealth games on the market. A lot of stealth games encourage you to stand around for ages to wait for guards to get into the right position so that you can do whatever it was you set out to do. Invisible Ink recognizes that if you were a super spy, you wouldn't be able to spend all day waiting around while the entire corporate fortress you have infiltrated goes into full lockdown mode. A super spy would move fast, take what they came for, and get out. There is a nice tension to Invisible, Inc., and it really feels satisfying where your team of highly trained espionage agents move through the building, hacking systems, stealing corporate info and tech, and disappearing before the security system realizes what is going on. Take too long, and the chances of your agents making it out alive become smaller every turn. If you like stealth games and you can deal with something that is a little tense and challenging, you should definitely buy this game. A word of warning though, this game can be really punishing and the learning curve is quite steep, so be prepared to die early on and start over a few times. The game has procedurally generated levels, and like Klei's other games, it relies on the player to learn and master its systems. As a result, it functions like a roguelike where you lose all of your progress every time you die. While you do unlock more content with each playthrough, this is less about making the game easy and more about giving you more options as to how you'd like to play the game. The real progression that will eventually allow you to complete the game comes from problem solving and the knowledge that you gain over time about the game's systems, agents, upgrades, enemies, etc. So this brings me on to Oxygen Not Included, and if you've seen any of the other videos on my channel, you wouldn't be surprised to hear that this is my favorite Klei Entertainment title. I've played it a lot, I'm still playing it to this day with the new DLC, and I'll probably put out a separate review to just deep dive on Oxygen Not Included. This is a game that combines strategy, survival, exploration, and creativity while taking inspiration from real science, albeit with a lot of creative license. Problems arise organically, and it's up to you to work out how to best solve them. Sometimes solving a problem leads to other problems. Sometimes everything seems to be fine until many cycles later when you realize the mistake you made and hope that you have enough time left to save your colony. If you're effective and efficient at dealing with these situations, your colony will get to keep on living and being happy. Get it wrong and things start to unravel. Keep getting it wrong and things will start to spiral out of control to the point where you know you only have a few more days before everyone dies. Then you start again, trying to survive longer. It's great fun, and the freedom the game gives you to build your own systems combined with procedurally generated worlds means that there is a ton of replay value here. This then brings me on to the final title that I want to discuss in this video, which is Griftlands. So Griftlands is a card battler, a genre that I'm mostly unfamiliar with, or at least I was mostly unfamiliar with until Griftlands came along. When I saw early gameplay, I almost dismissed it because I haven't really played these kinds of games, but I picked it up anyway because it was Klei Entertainment, and by this point I've come to trust that they don't produce anything less than great games. Griftlands did not disappoint. It is again heavily based on systems that the player can discover and master over time. It also again features procedural generation, permadeath, and it has a focus on input randomness as opposed to output randomness. I'll talk more about input randomness later in the video, but for now it's important to note that it heavily features in Griftlands and Invisible, Inc., and it's also present in Oxygen Not Included and Don't Starve. One of the great things about Griftlands is that it features a relationship system where NPC characters can love, like, dislike, or hate you depending on the actions that you take. Much like in real life, there's no pleasing everybody, and over time this leads to you interacting with a world full of memorable characters that can help you or hinder you depending on the situations that you find yourself in. I've never seen another game implement relationships in a way that is this interesting, but at the same time can be completely based around emergent gameplay with different relationships and situations unfolding with each playthrough. It leads to a lot of replay value and an overall great game to play irrespective of whether you are a fan of this genre of games. So now that we've had a quick look at all of the games, let's talk about what makes Klei different. If you've ever watched the YouTube channel Game Maker's Toolkit, you may have seen a video where Mark discusses the difference between puzzle games and problem-solving games. In essence, the difference between these two different types of games is that puzzle-solving games have one or a limited number of solutions that's waiting for the player to be discovered, and it usually relies on the player following a unique thread of logic that the developer intended. In contrast, a problem-solving game has multiple solutions to a problem. Now, I don't wish to make the point to say that problem-solving games are necessarily better than puzzle-solving games, but the reality is that puzzle games definitely have less replay value and less unique experiences as compared to problem-solving games. Problem-solving games ask the player to come up with their own solution to a problem, and because it does that, it means that every player is going to have their own unique experience in terms of solving that problem, which makes the game feel more special. This brings me on to the two main points of what all 5 of these Klei games that I discussed have in common. First, they are all heavily based around systems, and second, they all involve problem solving consistently throughout gameplay. Even Mark of the Ninja, which is probably slightly closer to a puzzle game than a problem solving game, still offers multiple approaches that you can take to every mission, and that means that every player's experience is going to be slightly different. Some players are going to take out all the guards, while other players are going to try to avoid being detected at all, and that leaves two very different experiences. If you look at the games that Klei Entertainment created after Mark of the Ninja, it's clear to see that all of those games were also heavily based around systems, and in addition, they were heavily based around problem solving, specifically as opposed to puzzle solving. This leads to 4 characteristics, which is what I believe makes Klei so successful. The first 3 are included by design, and the 4th is a consequence of that design. So first, all of the games I discussed here, even Mark of the Ninja, is heavily based on systems with consistent rules that the player can discover. Second, all of these games involve randomness, but more specifically, input randomness. Random input determines the situations that you'll be in, but the rules of how you interact with these systems are 100% consistent. Third, the problem that these games present you with can be solved in multiple ways. Again, problem solving as opposed to puzzle solving. And finally, the 4th point and the implication of this design is that this leads to both player agency and emergent gameplay, meaning that players could come up with solutions that the developers never intended. Not only does that give these games endless replay value, but it also means that every player will have a slightly different experience playing these games. In other words, these are effectively sandbox storytelling games. Klei doubled down on this strategy after Mark and the Ninja by making many of the subsequent games roguelikes or roguelites, depending on how you want to define it, which forces the player to live with their choices and experience even more interesting stories. Also, most of these games include an element of input randomness where every time you start the game, the world is slightly different, creating even more replay value. Of course, that's not to say that those are the only things that Klei is doing right. This is clearly a highly disciplined developer that knows how to put ideas into practice, and the releases are extremely well polished and balanced once it gets to the full release stage. However, I do believe that their focus on systems-based games with open problem solving and emergent gameplay is the common thread that ties all of these games together and has led to a lot of the success that this company has had. Personally, I'm really happy that this company has had so much success because there are really no gimmicks with them. No false advertising, no microtransactions, no cash grabs. Just honesty and really good game design. That's all from my side for today, but I'd love to hear more from you in the comments below. What are your thoughts? What's your favorite Klei game? And what do you like about the developer? As always, if you like this kind of content and you'd like to see more, please do like and subscribe, and I'll see you for the next video.